What's up, everyone? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Bucks. And today we're talking the draft. And I've said the whole way through, I am certainly not a draft expert. So we need to get someone in that knows what they're actually talking about here. We're a couple of days away from the draft. Matt Babcock is here. So we're going to talk about the Bucks pick 24 and everything else draft related. So let's get started.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on the show Monday to Friday, and also find my other work over at ESPN. And joining me today has had a number of hats along the journey, but at the moment, senior draft analyst over at basketballnews.com. And as we can see, the traditional hotel shot behind because you're in New York, Matt. It is NBA draft week, and we've been talking about it on our show just that last year and for the last few years actually with the Bucks. The draft has been a afterthought, really, but it does come up so quick after the NBA Finals. You're in New York, and a little bit more normalcy with the draft this year compared to previous years. You're traveling, you're flat out at this time of year. How's the head? Are you exhausted? Is the head spinning? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I just got to New York. I mean, New York will do that to you quickly, right? I mean, the traffic and the wide variety of people running around. It's exciting for sure. I just checked into the Draft Hotel, the Westin in Times Square, and players all around in the lobby. Everybody's pumped.
And I mentioned you had a number of hats, but you've been on the agent side of things. Do you enjoy this side of things and covering it from a media perspective and doing all the stuff that you do? It's I know it sort of all ties in together, kind of, but it's a different world.
Yeah, no, I'm really enjoying. I mean, working as an agent, I mean, it's a very stressful industry, and the lead up to the draft is very stressful. There's always so much uncertainty, of how things are going to unfold. I mean, but most of these teams, don't even know, what players they're going to end up with, much less the agents knowing where their clients are going to go. And so now my biggest stress is, Knicks fans blasting me when I update a mock draft. So I'll take that rather than parents calling me when they're not happy how I'm representing their son. So my stress levels are pretty moderate at the moment.
I would say feedback on all social media. Let's say we're all used to that. But I was just going through your latest mock draft a little bit earlier today. So how serious? I assume you get some pretty regular feedback from people that may consider themselves draft experts as well. How much time? And obviously, this is what you do all the time. But when you're doing a mock draft, it's obviously a challenging process. Part of it is what you assess with the players. Part of it is what you hear from the teams and those types of things. How do you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, throughout the season, we have a big board. Essentially, it's just player rankings, which it's essentially my player rankings, my own evaluations with the help of my support staff. And then as we get closer and an inch closer to the actual draft, we sort of shift a little bit more to projecting the picks with using our evaluations when there's some doubt. And so we the last couple of weeks, these are more of like we're trying to guess what the teams are actually going to do, or at least where what ranges the players will be in.
All right, let's start to get into this draft stuff now. But before we do, I did have, and I had it up because I didn't want to. There's so many family members of yours that are involved in basketball. I mean, you talk about a basketball family, but we are on Locked On Bucks. So, your father has been with the Bucks organization for how many years? We're talking now. It's well over 2 decades.
Let's see here. We first moved to Milwaukee in 1997, so I think he just finished up, what was it, his 25th year or 24th year? No, it's been a long time in regards. He's been with the Bucks for a very, very long time.
I think is the title now director of player personnel. Is that?
Yep.
There's been a few different hats. So what does that involve? What is he going through right now with the franchise? And of course, I'll ask. Well, who are the Bucks picking? Of course,
of course. Now the NBA draft is essentially his bread and butter. I mean, it always has been. His role, even though his title is changed, slightly here and there. His role is changed over time. I mean, at one point he was essentially number 2. At one point he was the interim GM after Larry Harris had parted ways with the team, and been there forever. Now essentially he assists mostly with the draft, covering college players. And so this is a big week for them, and You mentioned before they haven't had a high pick in a few years, which is a good problem to have. It's because they're good, So, but I know they're hoping to probably get somebody that could contribute.
So how do you assess the Bucks' position right now, just as you look at the entire roster? Because as you said, it changes, and when it actually does become more difficult, the longer you're contending, the salary stuff becomes more tight. The assets are perhaps bare, and they're certainly bare in the case of the Bucks. So when you look at their roster and where they're at, and where it finished up this year, and having this pick 24, which isn't a prime first round selection, but they haven't had one since Dante DiVincenzo. So, well, they haven't kept one since Dante DiVincenzo. So, how do you assess where the Bucks are at?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, these are all my opinions. This has nothing to do with my dad or anything.
I should say I was joking.
Just to put that out there. I mean, the way I would look at it is, I mean, every decision you make needs to be, with the thought of Giannis. How does this affect Giannis? How does this player work around Giannis? Whether that's a draft pick, whether it's a free agent signing, trade, everything needs to be about your superstar first and foremost. And so, with that being said, the way I would look at it is that there's somewhat of a juggling act, because you want to win now when you have a player of that caliber. But at the same time, Giannis isn't that old, so you also want to have some upside, within the roster to build as Giannis continues to be in his prime. And so I think you kind of look at it two different ways, depending on what options you have presented to yourself.
And so if we look at, and this is your latest mock draft, you can get it at basketballnews.com. So, and this is where it gets interesting, because before we get to who you've got on this latest mock, if the Bucks go through and they pick a player and they keep a rookie on the roster, are you worried when you look at this team positionally, certain type of player? Do you think that you need someone that can contribute right away? Is there even room to go for a player that maybe needs a few years to develop? Because, as you said, I think they are in an interesting position of balancing the future with also believing they didn't have a lot of depth when it came to the postseason last year, and they also think they can win a title this year.
Yeah, I mean, again, you're picking at 24. You really just need to see who's available, and it's hard to predict at that point. I mean, there'll be some guys that slip to some point or another. That, happens every single year. I mean, the idea would, the perfect scenario would be you get somebody that's able to contribute, some right away, but also has upside, right? So, yeah, I mean, again, it's hard to really say. I mean, I personally would be careful of kind of putting together a philosophy, or approach for a pick that's an extreme one way or the other. You just gotta look and see who's there and kind of weigh out the pros and cons with that group.
So you've got Kennedy Chandler, the guard out of Tennessee. This is interesting to me because when I was chatting with Frank Madden about just generally how people look at the draft, and 6 foot players these days it's crazy to just how the size has changed. And what I was saying to Frank is anyone really under 6'3", 6'4", it's like, wow, they're undersized, they're small guard. So what is it about Kennedy Chandler that either you think could fit with the Bucks, or why that maybe would be attractive option?
Yeah, no, I mean, Kennedy's certainly undersized. There's no doubt about it. He does have a long wingspan. He's incredibly athletic. I mean, that's the one thing that draws me to him, especially for the Bucks, is that his speed. He's able to create off the dribble, and I feel like the team. I mean, John has done such a great job of building a championship team, and complementary guys around Giannis. However, I personally would like to see them, take some pressure off of Giannis having to create everything on the offensive end with the ball in his hands. And Kennedy's the kind of guy, right off the bat, he'd be a backup point guard, somebody that could kind of drive the second unit, be a floor general, somebody that could stir things up with his speed, get in the paint. And he's a tough kid, tough, fiery kid. At 24, I think it would be a good pick, whether it's the Bucks or somebody else in that range. I do really like Kennedy Chandler.
Yeah, so I've gone through a bunch of the guys, and I've got a couple of names I'm going to run by you, which generally seem to be what we're getting the feedback with, or what the fans are intrigued by. But it does just seem to be such a disparity between guys that have range between pick 15, 16 into the early second round. Almost, it feels like a wider range than previous years. It feels odd in that way.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, especially we have so many young guys that are on, improving at the college ranks that have upside. So you got the balance of, let's say, like a Wendell Moore, who's a plug and play type guy that's probably in the Bucks range, and then you got a guy like Peyton Watson that hardly even played at UCLA this year, but has a lot of talent. And so I mean, just those two guys as an example of sort of the juggling act some of these teams have to do of figuring out what's the right move, because you could you could go one extreme or another if if you wanted.
All right, let's go through a couple of these guys. And I will say that generally it seems that the feel, and this is every NBA team, by the way, if you can get a guy on the wing that can defend multiple positions and knock down a few shots, it's kind of the prototype, I guess. But Dalen Terry out of Arizona, he does seem like he's potentially a guy that's going to be in that range.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's right in his range. I think he's somewhere, goes somewhere in the 20s or early 30s. Interesting guy. I expected him to go back to school, and so we didn't have him on our big board or our early mock drafts because I didn't expect him to be an option. Then when he decided that he was all in, we took him seriously, and I think we put him in the early 30s right off the bat. And he's an interesting guy. He's a Swiss Army knife type of player. He's 6'7". He can play the 1, 2, or 3 on both ends of the ball. His swing skill is outside shooting, and it's not totally broken, but he's got a lot of room for improvement. I mean, that would be the reason you would pass on him. Other than that, I mean, he plays with a great pace, motor, good defensively, and just so versatile, on the offensive end. A guy that you really could plug in to a lot of different teams or all teams for that matter.
I think perhaps the unanimous favorite at this point has been Jaylin Williams. And it's so weird to me because just again, from reading stuff from guys like yourself and on all the other draft experts out there, I didn't really understand why he would be there at 24. And because when you read all the reports, and there's at most guys that come in at around 24, there's obvious flaws in their game, or there holes in their game, or there's big question marks. And I was reading about him and I was just thinking, this guy does not seem to have as many question marks as the other guys. And then as we've gotten closer to the draft, it seems like he's probably skyrocketed up out of the Bucks range. Is that your general sense?
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like every passing day he's moving up the ranks, and I mean, it really started at the combine. I mean, he was the big winner of the combine, if you will, and I think a little bit of a victim. He came from a smaller school, and somewhat of a late bloomer. He's pretty similar to what I was saying with Dalen Terry. I mean, he's kind of in the same category as far as a guy that's Swiss Army knife that can play multiple positions. He's a 6'5", 6'6" ball handler. He's got a 7'2" wingspan, if I remember correctly. Not the most athletic guy. I mean, he uses his length and skills where he's able to perform some nice dunks and make different plays. Foot speed's a little bit of an issue, but I mean, it's looking like he's got a chance of even going in the lottery, which has been an incredible journey. Considering he was not even really a draft prospect going into the season.
Obviously, myself being in Melbourne, cover the NBL over here. There's a couple of G League Ignite guys that might be in that range. Marjon Beauchamp, also Jaden Hardy, who's really interesting to me. I don't know a lot about him, but other than obviously the pedigree was there. He was expected to be a high draft pick. He, again, based on what we believe, is potentially going to be there. What's the biggest concern with Jaden Hardy? Because, again, he does kind of fit that area, the positionally of what the Bucks might be looking at.
Yeah, no, I mean, extremely raw talent. Very talented kid offensively. I mean, he's explosive. Tough guy, and he's got deep range on his shot, and sort of just a knack to score all the way around. The big knock on him is, and he got exposed this year, is his lack of feel for the game, maybe his lack of basketball IQ. He's just a little bit behind, and that's why a lot of people had him slip. And he really slipped, across the board. And I mean, we started the year off, I think we had him at number 3 on our first big board, and that was pretty consensus, with everybody in the media that he was going to be a top guy, and just really didn't show that well, but still possesses a ton of upside. So I mean, somebody could end up with a pretty good player.
And in general, the G League Ignite, because my guy, the everyone's very excited over this part of the world about Dyson Daniels. He's been one that's really skyrocketed up the board. From the NBL, you have someone like Ousmane Dieng, who had not a great season over here. He finished the season strongly, but he just continues to rise again with the size, the things that he can do positionally. And then I already mentioned Marjon Beauchamp. So how do you judge these guys? Let's stick with the G League Ignite. How do you judge these guys in this team where there's multiple first-round potential prospects playing in a team, but they're playing professionally? How do you think it's settling out, how those guys are judged compared to potentially guys that have gone to college?
Yeah, and it's interesting that they've all had such different journeys up to this point. And I mean, Dyson Daniels, another guy that's really really continued to chip away at everybody, myself included. And he's big, he's versatile, tough kid. I mean, very similar to the two guys we just talked about with Jaylin Williams, Dalen Terry. He kind of falls in that same category of being a big guy that kind of checks a lot of different boxes. I think the biggest question with him is, how dynamic will he be offensively? I mean, he does a lot of different things, but does he got the right, personality type of being like a lead dog? I mean, that's my one holdup with him. But I mean, that's me being nitpicky. I mean, this guy's got a chance of being, a mid-lottery pick at this point.
And who else we got? EJ Liddell, another one that's very popular among Bucks fans.
Yeah, I mean, EJ had a terrific year at Ohio State. I mean, I thought their team was really good, very well coached team. And he's a plug and play guy. He's ready to go. He's a little bit older. He's coming off his junior year. Undersized 4 that's switchable. Shoots the ball well. They used him at Ohio State a lot in the mid post and high post, like isolation type stuff where they ran their offense through him. I think those days are over for him. I think he's going to be much more of a complementary player where he's going to need to be a face up for, kind of defend everybody, be sort of like an intangibles guy. But for a team like Milwaukee that is a contender year in year out, when you've got a guy like Giannis, I mean that's the one extreme of a plug and play guy, and EJ Liddell would be a good option for that.
So I think the other question, just more broadly about this draft. So I think the Bucks would have to make the selection. Obviously, there can be draft night trades, those types of things. But when you talk about being such a wide range, and another guy that played locally in Milwaukee that has climbed a little bit, people have been fascinated by, is Justin Lewis. But he looks like he could be available later into the second round. So is this the type of draft where you would be saying, I think you can get someone that's a real player at pick 24, or is there potentially options to trade back, have a couple of second round picks, maybe one second round pick, a future pick, those types of scenarios? Is this the type of draft, just with the wide range with some of these players, that it might not make a big difference?
I don't know. I my personal vote there would be, if they're giving me a vote, is keep the 24th pick to try and plug in somebody at that spot. In regards to Justin Lewis, I mean, he's actually kind of a poor man's EJ Liddell. Obviously, he's younger.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of does a lot of the same things. More of an undersized big that could stretch it a little bit and defend multiple positions. I didn't think he showed all that well at the combine. I thought it might have hurt him a touch. But I mean, he's a decent guy, and I think if he develops properly, could be that glue guy like I mentioned EJ Liddell is likely to be.
All right. Well, we appreciate the time. So you got a big few days. What does the next few days look like? You're so close to the draft now. I know a lot of the players, as you said, are just hanging out around New York here. So what are you getting up to? What does it look like?
Yeah. So tomorrow morning we got the media circuit. So we'll kind of have all the different draft players. I think we got 20 something guys and we coming through. Talk to a bunch of them. I got a camera crew following me all week and going to the draft, and gonna pick these guys' brains after their dreams come true and they figure out where they're gonna live and play next year. So just here to soak it all in, really. And it's funny, I've been covering the draft for a while now, and then I was an agent forever. I've actually only been to the draft one time in my life. It's sort of interesting to be here, rather than working the draft remotely.
Yeah, well, as I said, I think Bucks fans for the last few years haven't had too much to watch when it came to draft night. I think they were totally fine with it last year, but there is a bit of intrigue to see what they'll do. So we appreciate some actual expert advice rather than me rambling on and not knowing what I'm talking about. So Matt, big week for you. We appreciate the time.
No, thank you so much. Keep in touch.
Well, that's Matt Babcock, and as I mentioned, it's good to have an expert on the show that can talk us through and give us a bit of an insight into what could potentially happen on draft night for the Milwaukee Bucks. And there's some nice family ties there as well, which is always good. One live NBA draft show is not enough for Locked On, though. Every show is going to go live on draft night. So join me 15 minutes after our pick at Locked On Bucks on YouTube for the immediate reaction from your local expert. Subscribe now to Locked On Bucks. So you'll get the notification when we go live, and you'll be able to jump in. You'll be able to join us. The comment section will be there. Hopefully my internet holds up. Hopefully we can roll through and have a pretty fun show there. A lot of people have asked me to go live in the past, but draft night, we're doing it. Hopefully we're doing it, and hopefully it goes well, and hopefully the Bucks will have an interesting selection that we can discuss. If you haven't listened to the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft yet, you should go and do it. maybe I'll talk about my pick a little bit more tomorrow. The podcast is live now. You can check it out. I took a pick at pick 24, and I took a guard. There was a guard available on the board, and that's who I went with. I know, as I was discussing with Matt, for the most part, we've been discussing wings and forwards and versatile guys, which makes a lot of sense. There's no doubt about that. But I decided to go with a guard as I felt it was the best player available. But the first picks in the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft have been made. In fact, you can go right through the Ultimate Mock Draft right now. Search for Ultimate NBA Mock Draft and get over 50 insiders, the Odyssey Sports experts, draft experts of Locked On NBA Big Board. The 5-episode Ultimate NBA Mock Draft is underway. Make Ultimate NBA Mock Draft your second listen after you're done with Locked On Bucks. And that's going to do it for us today. We'll be back tomorrow. One more podcast pre-draft. And then, as I said, we're going to have some fun on Thursday night while the draft's going on. Plenty to look forward to on Locked On Bucks. We appreciate you joining us.